Good afternoon. Welcome to the 50/50 Women on Boards Toronto Conversation on Board Diversity. I'm Sarah Robson, the Chair for Toronto, and we're delighted to have you all here today to discuss how we can lead the way to diverse and gender-balanced boards. Before we begin, and in recognition of the importance of inclusion and diversity for all Canadians, we will start today's meeting with a land acknowledgement. Indigenous people of Canada have been stewards of this land. It is important to understand the long-standing history of the lands and waters many of us now call home. I want to acknowledge that Toronto is the Dish with One Spoon territory, a treaty between several nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. The dish represents the land that is to be shared peacefully, and the spoon represents the individuals living on and using the resources of the land in a spirit of mutual cooperation and in a manner that does not harm the land. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and by the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Today, as we join each other on this land, we continue to seek meaningful ways to protect the earth and future benefactors for the peace, reconciliation, and healthy environments being heralded by this land acknowledgement. We are here today to talk about inclusion and diversity and the role they play in creating stronger, more effective boards. In the 5 years since Marsh's sister company, Mercer, published the inaugural When Women Thrive Global Report, research shows that hiring, promotion, and retention rates of women around the world are now comparable to those of men across all career levels. While this finding represents a significant achievement globally, our analysis reveals that Canada is lagging the world in key indicators of its commitment to actual gender equality in the workplace. This is particularly true when we look at the engagement of senior executives and boards in I&D activities. Only 54% of Canadian senior executives report that they are actively engaged in I&D initiatives and programs, compared to 66% globally. And only 28% of board members report that they are engaged in I&D activities, compared with 57% globally. In short, Canadian boards need to become more engaged to ensure leaders drive passion and commitment for I&D down through the organization. And that is one of the many reasons we are here today. 50/50 Women on Boards is the leading global education and advocacy campaign driving the movement toward gender balance and diversity on corporate boards. I am honored to chair 50/50 Women on Boards' first ever Toronto Conversation on Board Diversity, and to be your moderator today. Before we jump into our conversation, I'd like to introduce Betsy Berkemer-Creder, CEO of 50/50 Women on Boards, to say a few words. Betsy?
Oh, thank you, Sarah. I'm so pleased to be here and so pleased that Toronto is the first ever time that we've had an event in Toronto. And thank you for your leadership and the volunteers on your committee. And I want to emphasize this is a whole volunteer activity throughout the year in order to put on a big event in November. So thanks very much. Appreciate it. And I'm just here to explain a little bit about 50/50 Women on Boards and to give you some update on U.S. statistics, how women are doing on corporate boards. And then our speaker, Andrew McDougall, is going to talk about the Canadian and the Toronto statistics that his firm Osler has put together. So just a little bit about 50/50 Women on Boards. We are a nonprofit campaign. We're not a membership organization, but a nonprofit campaign. And when the whole enterprise started in 2010, we were named 2020 Women on Boards because the first goal was to achieve 20% of women on all corporate boards in the Russell 3000. That's 3,000 companies, which is 3 times as many as the Fortune 1000 here in the U.S. And we achieved that goal in 2019. So this last January, we went through a major brand transition. We are now 50/50 Women on Boards, and we are marching toward the day when women will hold half of the board seats in all Canadian companies and in all U.S. companies. And people will look back and say, just like the Model T Ford, this is such an anachronism to even think about an all-male, all-white corporate board in business. And hopefully not too many years from now. It could be 5 years, could be 10 years. But with your help and your learning and all of you getting yourselves onto corporate boards, this is how we are going to make change. So you may not know this, but Toronto is one of 30 events called the Global Conversation on Board Diversity that we are staging all this month. And Toronto is one of our international cities. We're also featuring an event in London, Madrid, Mexico City, and Athens is also the first time this year. So Toronto and Athens are our first time and really, really important events to us, and all with the overarching theme, leading the way to diverse and gender balanced boards. So we've been working on this for quite a few years, as you heard, and fortunately we're no longer just a voice in the wilderness or in the dark, because the big institutional investors, as you know, BlackRock and Goldman Sachs, CalPERS, CalSTRS, the New York State Pension Fund, and the law in California, the law in California, but the law in Canada requiring the companies, report their efforts in diversity and including women on boards. That's really important, because it focuses on gender balance as a business issue. And the Credit Suisse research for years has pointed out that companies are more profitable and more productive when they have at least 3 women on their board. So all of you are going to start your career if you aren't already. We have a great panel to share with you today. And this will help you as you are marching toward being on the corporate boards yourselves. So let me share with you just briefly the U.S. statistics. Again, Andrew is going to cover the Canadian statistics shortly, but we are ecstatic that in the U.S. nationwide, among the Russell 3000 companies, we just achieved, as of June 30th, 25%. In fact, a little bit over 25%. And that's the highest in history, everybody, the highest that we've ever been. And again, that's among 3,000 companies. So there are about 26,000 board members on those 3,000 companies, 27,000. Approximately 10 per company, some fewer. But of those in the U.S., almost 7,000 are women. And the 7,000 board seats are held by women. And that's what got us to 25.6% this year, which is 3.5 points higher than we were last year, which is year over year, bigger growth over a 5-year period than ever before in those 3 percentage points. And nationwide company rankings, this is for the companies. It's surprising. We didn't expect this, but more companies are already gender balanced. It's not a lot, but out of the almost 3,000 companies, there are 215 now in the US that are gender balanced. That means half the board seats are held by women, or in a company that has an odd number of board seats, it would be one more or one less of those board seats held by women. 7% is a pretty good number when we didn't expect much at all. And that's 2 points better than last year and continuing to build. And of those companies this year that have 3 or more women on their boards, it's 34% of all of those companies in the Russell 3000, which is almost 10 points higher than it was a year ago. So 34% is continuing to grow, while the numbers of companies with 2 or 1 or 0 women on their boards continues to diminish as more women are taking seats on companies, and they're becoming 3+ or gender balance. And you can see all this research on our website 5050wob.com under research, under our gender diversity index. And yes, it's just of the US companies, but many of you Canadian women will want to perhaps pursue serving on American corporate boards. I know of several women who have done this, and vice versa, American women who serve on Canadian boards, because each country and each company that is based in that country and does business with the other country wants to have people on their boards who understand business in the other country. So now's the time for all women to be seeking boards, no matter where they might be and where you have contacts. Lastly, I want to share with you that only 12% of all directors are men and women of color, which is really a very low percent, and that it relies on people self-identifying their race or ethnicity on their company reports. And of that, 7% are men of color and only 4% women of color. So we have a long way to go in our goal to achieve 50% women on boards, but our goal is to achieve at least 20% of all board members being women of color. So women, you know how to take it from here and become board members. And very importantly, as we recommend in 50/50 Women on Boards, become allies to women, and especially women of color, in order to help them advance into leadership roles in your companies and someday serve on corporate boards. So thank you, Sarah. I'll turn this back over to you, and I can't wait to hear this fantastic panel.
Thanks, Betsy. Really appreciate hearing the update on the US statistics, and certainly some progress being made, and always still lots of work to be done as well. And so looking forward to hearing a little bit about the OSLA report and specific to some of the Canadian statistics as well. So thank you very much for joining us, and we're thrilled that 50/50 Women on Boards are now asking us in Canada to become involved. And so very much looking forward to our conversation. Okay, so without further ado, let's jump right into our discussion. And if we were in more normal circumstances, we would probably be sitting in either a hotel or conference rooms, is such that we would be able to actually see each other and be able to engage in the conversation. So we're going to have to imagine that we're all sitting in 4 chairs here. So I'd like to start by asking our panelists to introduce themselves. So Jennifer Tory, here we've got the panel now. So Jennifer, why don't you kick us off, please? Jennifer, I think you're on mute.
Take us off mute. A good evening, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to join the panel today. I think you wanted us to answer a question or introduce ourselves first?
Let's start by introductions first.
Okay, perfect. I have spent 42 years with RBC in Canada and retired at the end of December of 2019. I am thrilled to now be calling myself a corporate director, which I welcome the opportunity to speak about today. And I'm a passionate advocate for diversity and inclusion, not just for women, across the board, and really look forward to our conversation today.
Thanks, Jennifer. Pauline, what about you?
Hi, it's wonderful to be here, and wonderful to be part of inaugural event here in Canada. So I am Pauline Alimchandani. I'm the CFO of Northland Power, which is a global renewable energy company. We currently we do business in 15 countries around the world, and we started out as a Canadian company and proudly are a global company today. In addition to my role as CFO, I sit on a not-for-profit board, Michael Garron Hospital Foundation, and I'm also on the board of the Dream Impact Trust, which was a company I worked for previous to Northland. So I'm very excited to be here as a board member, but also as someone who's still, while I'm more than 15 years into my career, I'm still growing, and I'm still learning how to be a great executive and want to learn how to be a great board member and help take governance in this country and hopefully also in the States forward, and very, very passionate about diversity and inclusion.
Thanks, Pauline. You're in a unique position now with straddling both director as well as in the executive C-suite as well. So thank you very much. Andrew, last but not least, tell us about yourself.
So thank you, Sarah. Just to say it, I'm really very delighted to be here with you and Jennifer and Pauline and having this conversation today. I think it is fantastic that we can have these conversations in a way that we couldn't in the past. So a little bit about me. I am a partner at the law firm of Osler, Hoskin and Harcourt, one of Canada's leading national law firms. I'm a corporate lawyer, and I lead our practice in corporate governance and executive compensation. And I'm also a member of the Institute of Corporate Directors and serve on the GTA chapter executive for the ICD. We're very proud of the work that we have done from a diversity perspective, and it started with our report, which we're now into our 7th year, as articulated earlier, and I hope to share some of the work from that. But it's been a great passion of ours, and I'm so very happy to be here today.
Terrific. Well, thanks, Andrew, and welcome. Thank you to you all for agreeing to participate in this conversation. And I think we've got terrific backgrounds from which to draw. And so so that our audience understands the flow of the day today, following our panel discussion, we're going to break out into small groups for discussion led by a very impressive group of director coaches. So the director coaches are Daniela Dimitrov, who's the CFO of IAMGOLD Corporation, Jennifer Hirschfield, the co-lead of Spencer Stuart's financial officer practice, Selma Lusenberg, board member, Mag Silver Corp, Poonam Puri, professor and co-founder and director of the Osgood Investor Protection Clinic at Osgood Hall Law School, and Dara Rosati, founder and CEO of Women Get On Board. A big thank you to our director coaches and to our panelists for taking the time to join us for today's session. Our theme this year is leading the way to diverse and gender balanced boards. And we applaud all of you for doing exactly that and being committed to that. But let's get started on a personal note. I'd like to ask each of our panelists if you can tell us about a time when it really hit home for you that things were not going to get better with respect to board diversity if we just kept doing business the way we always have. And did that realization influence your own journey to the boardroom? So Jennifer, let's start with you. What's your personal story there?
Thanks, Sarah. And I think my personal story, having spent my entire career with a large financial institution, is one that many people have experienced, which is there still continues to be less representation in senior executive roles at large companies in Canada, even though we have made significant progress. If I think about what meeting rooms looked like even 10 years ago or 20 years ago, certainly, but 10 years ago even in my career, I do think progress has been made. But I think the stark realization for me was that the fewer senior executive women we had, the smaller the pool that there would be for boards to then draw upon, given that in many cases the criteria is quite specific, and the skills that they're looking for and the experiences that boards are looking for and the value add that you can bring to a board, I think has really made it difficult if, in fact, there aren't as many women in senior roles. If you add to that the few in Canada, and I don't have the numbers for the US, and perhaps Andrew has some of the numbers for Canada, but the number of women CEOs in Canada is still, I think, in the single digits of public companies, maybe more, and if you added in private companies. And there are still many boards who look at that CEO as a specific criteria before they broaden their search. So I think that was probably my biggest takeaway. And it wasn't why I was so passionate and committed to the development of women in my many years at the bank, but I think it was reinforced as my last 2 roles at the bank were in the C-suite, running our largest business, and then as the chief administrative officer. And it really became quite clear to me that there was opportunity there to seed boards from these very large companies where you had senior executives. So that would be, I think, something important to focus on.
Thanks. We're going to come back to that whole issue of the C-suite link as being a prerequisite, or seen to be a prerequisite.
I can just, if I can add, Sarah, the number is 4.8%, Jennifer.
So you were very close there.
Single digit, a very low single digit.
Yeah, there's only upside there. So, Pauline, what about you? What was your realization that really hit home to you?
Yeah, sure. So, while I was at CFO at Dream, I had 2 maternity leaves back to back. And as a CFO and executive of a large public company, it was paving paths that were not frequently traveled. And I did that with the support of the CEO, but really, the chair of the board, who was a woman and who was in my shoes many years before me, who said that, she wanted to make things better for me, and a desire to really make things better for me compared to the experience that she had many years ago. I think when you're moving in uncharted territory, you do need a lot of support around you, because it's very demanding. It's demanding at work. It's demanding at home. You still have to be there for your CEO and your board. And you can't do that without, support and confidence in who you are as a person and who you are as a leader. And so when I think of what's really important, it's about progressive changes and differences that are going to happen through generations. So like she made it, better for me, I'm going to make it better. She always says, you'll make it better for my daughter, and my daughter will make it better for your daughter. And for me, that really resonates as to what I feel my purpose is, both as an executive and as a board member, is really to progressively make change. And particularly for women, it's to provide support, particularly given things like maternity leaves and leading and managing while you're not physically at work or physically there for your team. There is a period of time where that was the case. And how do you do that? And how do you do that successfully? And how do you do that well and feeling, supported through that time period? So for me, I think it's, creating that pipeline of future board members is keeping more women in C-suite roles and keeping more women in leadership roles and giving them the tools and the support in order to do that.
Thanks, Pauline. Thank you for sharing such a personal story as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have a lot of conversations around how to make sure that we're engaging our colleagues who are out on maternity and paternity leave to make sure that we're giving them the support that they need in their careers to be able to continue to progress. So thank you. And that concept of paying it forward is something that I think we're all feeling that we need to make sure that we're doing in order to continue to elevate boards in Canada. So Andrew, over to you. What's your personal story?
So mine will be a little bit different, but my background was in corporate governance, and I was involved as a staff member of the Day Committee back in the 90s, which really spoke to the need for independence in the boardroom and recruiting independent directors to serve on boards. And the important part of that was that I could see over time just the dramatic impact that it had on board operations and corporate governance practices just by changing the people that were in the seats. So when it came that this new disclosure instrument was coming out, I was meeting with a good friend of mine, Deborah Rosati, who's one of the leaders of one of the sessions afterwards. And we were just bouncing around a few ideas and concluded, gee, wouldn't it be great if we actually did something with this disclosure that's coming out and really gave people some tools to help further the conversation? And it was really out of that conversation that we started our initial report on diversity disclosure practices, and it has just continued ever since. But it's from those conversations that we have one-on-one with people that I think some of the most dramatic changes can happen.
That's a terrific story as well. And I remember the Peter Day Commission and the report. And that was sort of when I started my governance journey and passion for diversity as well. So thank you to all of you for sharing your personal stories. We're now going to shift over to some of your experiences, if you would, and perhaps some commentary about some best practices. So Pauline, if I can start with you. As a board director, could you share some of the practices or ideas that either you and the boards that you work with have put in place to attract diverse board members?
Sure. I'll share, an example on the Michael Garron Hospital Foundation, which is a community hospital in Toronto's East End that serves quite a diverse population in the city. And when I was on the governance committee of Michael Garron. I mean, the one thing that I noted that they did really well was, the pipeline of candidates for the board. They really solicited everyone that was part of that hospital community. Mm-hmm. So whether it was doctors, nurses, suppliers, and any of the banks, any volunteers. And I think that's really important for your board to reflect the diversity in your underlying business and to source candidates that really could come from anyone that has any affiliation with the organization, as opposed to, I think, how things have traditionally been done, which is, you're going to a recruitment firm or you're going to the existing board. I think you are limiting the number of candidates that come forward. And it's a lot of the same candidates that come forward, as opposed to people truly from different backgrounds, truly from different, educational experiences, truly from different, parts of the city or different geographies, depending on the organization you're at. And so that's, an example I share that I think works really well, just because of how diverse of a pool they really go to solicit board candidates. And no person or no individual is too senior or too junior to put forward someone who they think would be great to serve on the board.
That's a great story. That's really getting at cognitive diversity, isn't it? Bringing a fairly broad community that is, and having a board that is actually reflective of that community that it's actually serving. What a great example. Jennifer, from your experience then, has your experience been similar to Pauline's, or what are you working with doing to attract diverse candidates?
It has, particularly in the not-for-profit sector, where I have many years of experience on various boards. And but the very first thing I would say is it has to be very deliberate. If you just try and fill the position, then you often end up with a slate that is not diverse. But if you keep going back at it until your slate is diverse enough that you can actually have a meaningful discussion about a number of different candidates with different backgrounds, I think that it makes it much more likely that you're going to land with some diversity in your pipeline. I want to just pick up on the paying it forward. Since I have been on boards and also in being approached for different opportunities, I feel it's critical for women to help each other. So that notion of paying it forward, I actually now keep a list of women that I've worked with throughout my career, not obviously in banking, but people I know in my network that have different skill sets and so on. I only give it to those who I feel are really working hard for the advancement of this. I don't just hand it out because I think it's really important to highlight people that may otherwise not have their name surfaced. The other thing is the idea of a skill set. You know, you have a skills matrix, but often we forget the diversity lens on that. And so I think that having the diversity lens be part of your skills matrix as you're continuing to look at what it is that your board needs is really critical. And I think the other is looking at not-for-profit boards and the people in leadership roles on not-for-profit boards. I think sometimes we overlook the experience that a large, in particular, large not-for-profit boards, like hospital boards, things like that, actually give to candidates. And so if you look at who's the chair, you know, people like that, it surfaces some people that you might otherwise not surface. And to Pauline's point, it's often they've gone further in terms of their community and looking at the types of candidates they want for their boards. So just a few thoughts there. I think the most important being it has to be deliberate and not expedient, and you have to work at it.
Those are great points. I love the comment around looking at the skill sets of the not-for-profit executives as well. Do you think then generally that recruitment strategies have changed or are changing?
Actually, that's a really good point. I think there's still a bias to, and I think Andrew will get into this a little bit about the criteria. And I think your comment about the CEO, and I think there's still a bias thinking that that's the be all and end all in terms of the experience. There are many, many senior jobs. Why wouldn't we want a CFO like Pauline, or, you know, a CAO like me, or a head of a business coming from a large company? So I think that we need to change that to broaden the pool, both from a gender standpoint, but also from a broader diversity standpoint.
I couldn't agree more with you on that basis. And I think, you know, and the wider that we can cast the net, if you will, and I'm a firm believer in cognitive diversity. There's no point having the same experiences, and that applies both from management perspective and a C-suite perspective, as it does even more so at the board level as well. And so we need to make sure that we're bringing those experiences in a lot more broadly.
And you're not watering down your qualifications. You're just changing the initial filter, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. So we heard Betsy speak earlier about some of the U.S. statistics. And Andrew, you've been, I think, on the speaking tour, if you would, around the report that Osler has just released, the 2021 Diversity Disclosure Practices Report, of which you were a principal author. And so in this report, you found that women hold approximately 23.4% of board seats among TSX listed companies. And the rate at which women are being appointed reached its highest level to date this past year, which is good news. But still, some companies, particularly large companies, have been more successful than others at adding female directors. What practices can other organizations learn from these experiences to advance more diverse boards? And what role can targets and diversity policies play in advancing diversity in the boardroom? So there's a whole bunch of questions in there, but why don't you tee it up for us then in terms of your research?
So I'll try to pull a few of the strings from what we were able to glean, and you know, this is all derived from what companies have said that they are doing, and there is a wealth of information in terms of what companies disclose. One of the key things that has changed over time is the adoption of board diversity policies and putting it in writing and having that conversation at the board level. In fact, it was because that conversation wasn't happening that a number of years ago, we worked with the Institute of Corporate Directors and created a customizable, downloadable template written board diversity policy. You plunked a few information in, you pushed a button, and it would generate that policy. And why did we do that? Because then the corporate secretary, or indeed any director, could take that policy to the board and use it as a leverage point for a conversation that really wasn't happening at the time. And that was the goal, to get the conversations going so that there would be subsequent action. A couple of the comments that both Jennifer and Pauline made that I think really resonate is that it is work to expand your board and look beyond your comfort zone of your immediate close contacts. You sometimes have to go in and find people that you may never have encountered before with very different ideas. And they may not be, what you are thinking would be the norm, but that's exactly why you want them on the board of directors. So a number of companies have identified that when they are recruiting, they will specifically require that women be included in the pool, or that they will just recruit for a woman for a role. And those are important changes, because even though, as you mentioned, the proportion of board seats that women are now taking up when they become available is the highest it's ever been, it's still only at 39% of the board seats that become available during the year. And if we're going to get to 50-50 on board, we need that percentage to be much higher than 50% in order to really drive progress. Some of the other practices really look at sort of expanding the way that boards look for diversity character or for diversity characteristics, looking at different sources. And there are some pools of communities that are out there to help them expand their roles. And a number of them are mentioned in the report. But it's work, and you have to really put the effort into it. So I absolutely agree with Jennifer's comments.
And do you want to go there on targets?
So targets are a bit of a challenge. When we first started seeing corporations adopting targets, lo and behold, the target that they adopted was one that they had met.
Yeah.
And so you saw targets at 20%, 25%, which they had already met. It's to some degree that's understandable. You want to make sure that when you achieve the target, you are going to be able to continue to meet that target regardless of turnover on the board level. What really made a big difference, though, for corporations, with the institutional shareholders taking on a real interest in improving diversity on boards. And so now the ISSs, so Institutional Shareholder Services, which makes proxy voting recommendations that are followed by a large number of institutional shareholders, looks at S&P TSX composite companies and is looking for 30% women on the board, or the adoption of a target to achieve 30% women on the board within a reasonable time frame. That's a big change, and it has been a gradual increase. Initially, they were just looking for one woman on the board, but that's because we had so few of them out there. So, as we ratchet up the standards and the expectations, we are seeing the progress being made.
Good. And I thought it was interesting in the report also commentary on some of the other jurisdictions, other countries, and some of the pushes that they're putting on, particularly the FCA in the UK, in terms of being pretty prescriptive about going on a much broader basis than just gender diversity, but also going into specific positions needing to be both representing gender diversity, but also much broader than that as well, into ethnic diversity as well.
Well, and although they were very upfront in the UK at pursuing the concept of ethnic representation, the 1/21 was the start of their report. It wasn't the UK that started mandating disclosure. It was Canada, the first jurisdiction in the world, with CBCA corporations being required to provide disclosure about visible minorities, Indigenous peoples, and persons with a disability. No other jurisdiction has mandated that disclosure in the world. So
let's pivot now. I want to go back to, excuse me, the concept of going again a little bit more deeply on broader diversity, but also talking about the executive officer level that Jennifer you raised right at the beginning. And it gets highlighted in the Osler report. The Canadian Public Company Boards continue to add more women directors, and that visible minorities have also made some small inroads into Canadian boards. However, women and diverse groups are making very little progress at the executive officer level. And Jennifer, to your point, yet, companies are looking for that C-suite experience, excuse me, when selecting new directors. And so I'd like to delve into that in a little bit more detail. How can we go about increasing the proportion of traditionally underrepresented groups in the C-suite roles in order to build that robust pipeline for board positions? And then Pauline, I'm going to come your way afterwards with that as well.
Probably one of my favorite topics as an executive in a large company. Again, I go back to the deliberate actions that need to be taken. I think that too often we don't spot talent and early enough in their career, and then we don't take very deliberate steps to develop the skills that they would need to eventually be considered for executive and then senior executive roles. And so while the opportunities might come their way, we haven't necessarily started with that broad enough pipeline of people to be able to then develop a broad enough cross-section of people to be able to assume those greater responsibilities. And so I think that it starts there. And I think things like staffing protocols, where every list that as companies are staffing roles should have not just gender balance, but have people from, people of color or whatever diversity we want to increase. It can't, and if the list doesn't have that kind of representation, we have to send it back. We have to not, as I said earlier, do the expedient thing and pick one of the people on the list. And I can't tell you in my experience how often that was necessary in order to actually make real change and have people understand that, that you mean it. I think the other opportunity is in recruitment. I think we have to get better at broadening our horizons as to who gets recruited into companies, and also, not-for-profits, as we discussed, because those are ways as well to build skills for people who might, as they progress in their careers, be considered for board roles. And then finally, I want to just talk for a second about the confidence gap. And Pauline mentioned that. I still think it's a real issue for women. And I think if I were to be as bold as to say it's probably also an issue for people of color, is that if they're underrepresented, they're not as comfortable right out of the gate around the table, but also, helping to increase their confidence level by giving them opportunities to stretch themselves and giving them opportunities inside companies where they can chair employee resource groups, or they can, have a leadership role on a project where their light comes out from under the bushel, and they can actually develop some skills at the same time as they get recognized as someone who has capabilities beyond what they've been able to show necessarily in their day-to-day. So just a few comments there.
Fantastic. I love the reference also to the colleague resource groups, to giving a different platform to people, because those tend to have the opportunity to be displayed, if you would, to present themselves on a much broader
senior
basis.
Groups.
Exactly, to the senior groups. And so I think that's terrific. And we also find that they drive the real fabric of the organization in terms of culture, which is a critical part of this part of an organization as well. So Pauline, you've worked for a variety of different industries. So in your experience, how are organizations creating pathways for women and underrepresented groups to advance their careers to the executive officer level?
I think I've been quite fortunate to work for companies that were purposeful and deliberate in promoting women. And, I mentioned my role at Dream. And, when I was nervous to tell my CEO I was pregnant, and I remember sort of having a lot of nerves about it. But when I actually told him, he was great about it. And he said to me, I want to use you as a guinea pig to show other women in this company that they can do it as well. So I want to, it's in my interest, it's in your interest to make this work, make this successful. And I think really, it's purposeful, it's deliberate, but there's a clear sponsorship and clear culture and value in the organization that is, clearly communicated. And I think, as much as the situation was personal, you realize how many people it impacts both in your organization and outside of your organization when you take leaps like that. And so I think it's really important that there are programs in place, and those programs are shared, and it's one thing to have it reported on, but it's another thing to have forums where you discuss and how to make those programs better. And every organization is trying to improve to retain talent, and retain diverse talent in their companies. So I think the conversations that are happening now are important and great, but there's always opportunity to do better, particularly as some of the stats that you did talk about with respect to people of color. I think it's a good thing that there's more deliberate conversations out there, but there are some ways to go to have these programs be organic in companies, so that you are creating that pipeline. It's going to take time. It's going to take years, but it starts now.
And I think transparency as well, to your point about talking about it much more openly as well.
Right.
As to what those opportunities are. And as you're talking, if you're more transparent about it, then I think people are going to naturally ask questions, want to become involved, and ask the question, how do I get there? How do I get to the next role, and how do I get to the next one after that as well? And that helps organizations in terms of, who is ambitious and wants to move forward in those ways into the C-suite and beyond.
Right.
Great. Andrew, so you had one of the statistics within the OSA report was the number of TSX companies with targets for women executive officers is very low, 10.7%. So along the same lines with your research, what practices are you seeing in your research to narrow that gap and really try and make sure that pipeline is being built specifically up to the C-suite?
So targets at the C-suite are a very difficult thing to try to implement. You have to worry about human rights concerns and balancing multiple interests and focusing on one diversity characteristic to the exclusion of others. It can be a bit of a challenge for any organization when you should be looking at inclusion more broadly. Mm-hmm. And so it hasn't been a tool that companies have typically used. Very low interest, as you've pointed out. I think though, and I think Pauline's example is a really great one. The pull has to come from the top with a CEO that is committed to diversity and fostering a broader culture, because you really need that leadership to demonstrate to people that there is a possible path forward for them. Some of the other tools, one of the most powerful is just measuring. It's remarkable how many organizations have not really kept track of the percentage of women or people of various different diversity characteristics at different levels within the organization. But if you track that over time, it can give you some very powerful insight into where obstacles are being encountered that are preventing the organization from achieving a more diverse, leadership group. But beyond that, some of the others of support networks and being able to create a diversity committee that will be focused on some of these issues and will look to execute and make sure that there is an opportunity to bring people along throughout the organization at different levels are very, very powerful and are commonly represented in there. One of the most interesting ones are those industries where the percentage of women, for example, is very, very low. And some of the organizations have gone out and funded university students
Yeah.
to recruit women into them. Like getting more women into the STEM program, getting more women engineers. What an amazing impact that's going to have on a whole variety of industries in Canada as those numbers come up. So there's a number of different tools. None of them bring you a short-term quick answer. They all take a longer-term perspective, but that's the nature of the work. This is something that we all have to work at continuously.
Okay, great observations there. And the whole point about measuring is just so critical, isn't it? To be able to, the data speaks. And again, you don't get the insights until you've had a number of years of the collection of that data to understand the trends and what's working and what's not. So very, very critical. So we've only got a couple of minutes left. The hour seems to have gone by very, very quickly. So in closing, I would like to ask each of you what personal advice that you would give to our participants to advance their journeys to the boardroom and accelerate gender balance and diversity on corporate boards. So Pauline, let's start with you.
Sure. I think mentorship is really important. I feel like mentorship has shaped my career. And you're never too senior to be mentored. And I think we're all in a position to mentor someone or a number of people, depending on, what that looks like for each of us. I think it makes such a big difference. And right now, I think, when you look at some of the numbers, I mean, mentoring one or two great people, whether you're, within the company or on the board you're on, even, more senior, I've seen more senior board members, help to onboard, more board members that have just joined. All of those things are advancing diversity, and it's advancing, the quality of the board as a whole, and how a board functions as a whole is really important in all of this as well. So that would be my advice: is take on mentorship and be a mentor. And it's it's on the pay it forward, but it's also that as you get recruited to a board, there are new challenges and different challenges in front of you, and it's a different experience level from being an executive. And that's where I really feel like I learn a lot being on other boards, even though sometimes it can be quite a bit of a challenge to manage all the commitments. And the other thing I would say is I got asked to join a not-for-profit board very early on in my career. And, when it came to confidence, I said, I'm not sure that I'm, the right candidate for this. And that was my response. I promised myself I would never say that today, but I did back then. And I remember the chair that recruited me said, you know what, I was recruited when you're your age, and, you're going to be great. It's going to take you time. Mm-hmm. There's so many things you can contribute and add to that we need here. And I have met so many great people through the years, like what Jennifer noted. You meet so many amazing people from different backgrounds. And it's been an incredible experience, and it's a great way to practice and learn and be part of a network of people who are there towards, supporting a great cause that they're all very passionate about. It's very an engaging thing to be a part of, and I would encourage anyone and everyone to pick a not-for-profit that they are passionate about and get involved in. It's a good service, but it's also good for development purposes as well.
Your passion just came through there, Pauline.
Yeah.
loud and clear. Let's go back. I loved your comment also about, the onboarding onto a new board and the mentoring that needs to take place. It doesn't stop there, right? Because that's also, exactly. That's a cultural side as well. It's one thing to have, most boards have obviously got an onboarding process for new directors, but there's a whole other side to it as well.
For sure.
That goes well beyond the understanding of the dynamics of the board and that organization. And so love that comment. I think that probably gives our audience members, our participants, some hope that they're not going to be just on their own as they take on that first board seat. So thank you for that. So Jennifer, I saw you nodding a lot during that. You've had some similar experience, it looks like. But so what are your thoughts for the audience?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Well, first of all, I think the most important thing is not to sit back. You can't be a passenger on this journey. You have to actually do some things, as Pauline and others have already highlighted. I think we've touched a bit on network, but I think if I had a second point to make in my very first answer, what have I been surprised at? I assumed when I was available for board opportunities that they might come through search firms, but they come through your network, even still, which is why it's not a surprise that men have had more success on getting onto boards, because traditionally the networks of men in CEO jobs and senior roles. So it goes back to all the discussion we've had. And so, as Pauline highlighted, building your network as part of what you do to prepare yourself is very important, and to do it through ways like not-for-profit boards where you meet people from all sorts of backgrounds, and then they also get to observe you and see your skill set and can be champions for you down the road. Another would be to actually reach out to firms that have a specialty in trying to help diversity on boards. And there are a number. I'm not going to list them, but I certainly know you can find if it's referenced on their early page of their website in terms of their board practice, you know that they mean it. But I think most firms today would have a practice that included a focus on diversity. And then the final one is to also look to women directors that talk to them, because as Andrew pointed out, we still have a lot of companies where they maybe have one or two women directors, because the boards are small. It might get them up to 30%, but they're not going to get to 50 unless they find other women. And the pool, as we've already highlighted, is quite small. And if you were to talk to women that know you, then they could become a sponsor for you, because often directors are asked for names of people that I regularly get asked that they might suggest are pursued. So just a few thoughts that I would have.
Thanks, Jennifer. Terrific advice. Andrew, we're going to give you the last word.
Well, there's not much to say. I think, Pauline and Jennifer have done such a fantastic job covering things. I think the only piece that I could possibly add to that is be bold and feel free to speak up. It is pushing past your comfort zone that you really get an opportunity to shine, and it's hard to do that, but when you do that, you really demonstrate the leadership skills that people are looking for in their senior executives, that they're looking for on their board members. And so I would encourage people very much to really take that extra step and go beyond what they would feel comfortable with.
Great advice. I love be bold, get out of your comfort zone, deliberate. Jennifer, you used the term deliberate a couple of times, which I think makes a lot of sense. Purposeful actions, Pauline, that resonates. And then measuring, I think we really do need to do that. And that includes measurement of ourselves as well, in terms of our own skills and how those are progressing, and being deliberate and thoughtful as we're on our journey to whether or not it's the C-suite or to the boardroom as well. And so terrific advice. Such a stimulating conversation. Thank you, Jennifer, Pauline, and Andrew, for taking the time to speak with us today. Your commitment to promoting board diversity and encouraging the advancement of women business leaders is truly inspiring. So thank you for sharing your stories. I hope all of our attendees found our panelists' insights and observations as thought-provoking as I did. But as engaging as our panelists have been, we're not done yet. Now we have our breakout sessions, small group discussions with our director coaches. To access your breakout room, look over to the left side of your screen and click Agenda. On your agenda, you will see your breakout room. Click into the session and then click Join Now to enter the breakout room. If you have any issues accessing the breakout room, please go to the Help Center, which is located to the left of your screen, or email events@5050wob.com. The email is located in the description of today's session. Good night, everybody, and thank you for joining in today's conversation. Enjoy your breakout discussions.